So the long-awaited debut of Grand Slam Track has officially commenced. The first meet is done, and there's kind of some things, some key takeaways that I kind of wanted to bring up. Now, overall, I will say before this meet, I was a pretty big hater on Grand Slam Track because they're kind of trying to compete with the Diamond League. They're kind of trying to take away from the sport a little bit, in my opinion. They're not extremely like a track purist standpoint. They're kind of making the sport a little bit gimmicky, in my opinion. But after watching the events and seeing the events unfold, I will say I was pretty interesting to see like the 1,500-meter guys race the 800-meter guys. I really liked that. But on the other hand, I did find it to be very gimmicky, and I think it was kind of a bit redundant at some points. You know, like after the first race kind of happened and we got to see all those guys race, I feel like the second events were a little bit taken away after the first events. You know, the parts that I really liked was the aspect of just putting guys that wouldn't normally race each other into the same event. You know, like the 1,500-meter race and the 800-meter racers. That was basically the highlight of the meet. Now, a way that they could kind of incorporate this into maybe the sprints is to have the hurdlers actually race like the flat distances. Like, see the hurdlers up against the actual sprinters. I think that would have been really cool. But instead, they just kind of had the hurdlers see who's the best at hurdling and who's the best at running the flat speeds. You know, we kind of don't really need to see a bunch of hurdlers run kind of a slower time in the flat events. I kind of want to see them compete against like actual athletes in that event. Another aspect that I think was kind of to its detriment was just the low amount of volume of competition. There's 6 event groups, male and female, making a total of 24 races across 3 days. That's 8 races a day. You know, most people that are paying to go watch a track meet want to watch like a full track meet, but instead they were paying tickets to go watch like 8 races. I mean, that may have kind of been why there wasn't that many people in the stands. You know, a lot of people noted that the stands seemed pretty empty. And I kind of felt like there wasn't really that many people, especially during the distance events. You know, usually in Diamond Leagues, we can see people filling out the stands. You know, people say that Jamaica is a sprint nation. They love track and field, but they didn't really show out that well. I mean, they did have a good home stretch for the sprints, I will say that. But overall, they didn't really fill the stands like you would see in maybe a European Diamond League. You know, all this considered makes me kind of wonder how profitable was this meet. You know, overall, it's probably not going to be get them out of the red right away. You know, they spent a lot of money investing into this idea. You know, it's probably going to take years for them to really turn a profit on this and kind of get their name out, you know, at the end of the day. But I hope it doesn't turn into something like the XFL where they kind of just come out for a season and then they just kind of fizzle out. But right now, it's kind of looking like it might be that way. Overall, I think that this kind of lacked what you would see in like a Diamond League where you would see just a full stands, just crazy fast times and people competing against each other. But instead, we just got to see like a field of 8. You know, in distance running, especially, you really got to have a full field to actually like create a great race. You know, 8 people racing a 5K is really not going to be that entertaining, because you're just going to see, you know, some tactics you might see, or like in the 3K where Hagos Geberwart just kind of ran away and Grant just decided I'm going to sit in third. That was a little boring. You know, a lot of people don't really want to see tactical races. You know, a tactical race every now and then can be very entertaining, but I think especially in the 5K where you're just jogging around for like all of the laps and then just sprinting the last 400, it just kind of takes away from the event, in my opinion. I think a lot of people kind of feel the same way. You know, I personally don't mind seeing people run crazy fast times. You know, seeing people run 12:40s at Diamond Leagues is just insane. Probably not good for their longevity of their career, especially, you know, peaking early or something like that. But I do think it's crazy to see people run like world records all the time. You know, we can't have that all the time, but at the end of the day, I'm not the biggest fan of tactical racing. And, you know, the sprints especially, you want to see people run fast in the sprints. You don't want to see people running like sprints 2 times. You don't want to see people doubling in the sprints to run like mediocre times. Because, you know, we see high schoolers running like 10.5 or like 20 point. You know, we want to see some crazy fast times in the sprints. You know, sprinting is all about running fast. People don't really care about who wins. You know, they want to see fast times. Now, the goal of this was originally probably to try to get new eyes on track. I'm not sure if they really reached that goal. I don't really know that many people outside of the track world that would really want to watch Grand Slam. I mean, it was on Peacock. Maybe some people tuned in. We'll have to see how the numbers did as a result. But overall, I mean, yeah, it was an interesting idea, but at the end of the day, I don't know if I see this succeeding. I'm not an expert. It's just my humble opinion. I hope you guys enjoyed this yap session, but that does it for my opinions on Grand Slam track.